I was washing Miriam's Pyrex dish when I heard the car doors, two of them, closing in sequence like a question and answer. My hands went still in the soapy water. The brothers hadn't spoken in months, not since the argument at the hospital. They certainly didn't travel together. I dried my hands on the towel Miriam embroidered 30 years ago. Peonies slightly faded. Through the kitchen window I watched them come up the walk. Marcus moved like a man performing concern, shoulders back, face arranged in responsible son configuration. Joel walked 3 steps behind with his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. The space between them was careful, negotiated. Brothers who had agreed to a ceasefire but not a peace. They both carried cream-colored envelopes. My heart kicked once hard. Miriam, I thought. What did you do? I met them at the door before they could knock. Marcus had his hand raised. Joel had his eyes on the porch boards. Up close I could see the fine tension in Marcus's jaw, the way Joel's shoulders were hunched against more than the April wind. Marcus smiled the smile he'd learned in boardrooms. "Benya," he said, "sorry to drop by unannounced. We wouldn't bother you except there's been a small problem with Mom's estate. Nothing serious. Just a detail that needs sorting out." Joel said nothing. He was looking past me into the house, into the kitchen where his mother and I had shelled peas and argued about presidential elections, and folded 1,000 loads of laundry over 4 decades of friendship. I stepped back to let them in. They moved into my hallway like diplomats entering neutral territory. Marcus first, Joel following, and I noticed how they positioned themselves with the small table between them. The envelopes they held were identical, expensive stationery, Miriam's angular handwriting stark against the cream paper. Marcus set his envelope on the hall table with the gentleness of someone handling evidence. "The thing is," he said, and his voice had that patient tone he probably used with difficult clients, "Mom seems to have mixed up the letters. In her final days, you know how the medication affected her clarity. She wrote our names on the wrong envelopes." Joel's jaw tightened. I watched the muscle jump. I picked up Marcus's envelope. The name was written in Miriam's hand, strong and clear. No tremor, no hesitation. Marcus David Rosen. I'd seen Miriam's handwriting in those last weeks, the way the morphine made her script wander and shake. This was written earlier when she still had strength, when she knew exactly what she was doing. "How do you know they're wrong?" I asked. Marcus blinked. "Well," he said, "it's obvious when you read them. The content doesn't match the recipient." Mom clearly got confused about which envelope was which. Joel made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something sharper. Marcus ignored him. "Maybe we should sit down," I said. I put on coffee because it gave me something to do with my hands while I studied them. Marcus stood by the kitchen table, not quite leaning against it, projecting casual confidence. Joel stayed near the doorway like he might need to escape. Neither of them sat. The envelopes lay on my kitchen table between the sugar bowl and the salt shaker, 2 cream rectangles that seemed to pulse with significance. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed. I got down Miriam's favorite mugs, the blue ones we'd bought together at that pottery sale in Vermont. I was aware of both brothers watching me, Marcus with growing impatience, Joel with something that looked like dread. "Tell me about when you got them," I said. Marcus cleared his throat. "The lawyer gave me mine at the reading of the will. Standard procedure. Very professional." He paused, glanced at his brother. Joel's was apparently hidden in his coat pocket. "He found it after the funeral." I poured coffee, the smell rich and dark. "Joel," I said. He looked up. His eyes were the same gray as Miriam's had been. "She must have slipped it in while I was carrying her suitcase to the car," he said quietly. "That last trip to the hospital. I didn't find it until I got home from the cemetery. It was just there, in the pocket I'd used to help her." like she'd planned it. The coffee finished brewing. I poured 3 cups, added cream to mine the way Miriam had taught me, 2 parts coffee to 1 part cream. Marcus took his black. Joel didn't touch his. And you both read them, I said. Marcus nodded. That's when we realized the mistake. The content doesn't match the son. Obviously, Mom intended these for each other. Obviously, Joel said. And the word had an edge. Marcus turned to face his brother for the first time since they'd entered my house. Joel, he said, his voice tight with patience, I know you want to make this complicated, but it's simple. Mom was dying. She got confused. We swapped the letters and read what she actually meant to tell us. Joel's hands came out of his pockets. Maybe she meant exactly what she wrote. That doesn't make sense, Marcus said. Maybe it's not supposed to make sense to you. The air in my kitchen changed. I could feel the argument they'd been having before they arrived. The one they'd papered over with politeness for my benefit. Marcus's wedding ring tapped against his coffee mug, a quick nervous rhythm he probably wasn't aware of. I set down my cup. The sound made them both look at me. Let me see them, I said. Marcus handed his over immediately. Joel hesitated, then slowly drew his from his jacket pocket. I laid them side by side on the table. The handwriting was identical on both, same black ink, same firm pressure. Marcus David Rosen on one, Joel Samuel Rosen on the other. No shakiness, no uncertainty, no confusion. She wrote these at least 2 months before she died, I said. Look at the script. This is before the morphine, before the weakness. She knew exactly what she was doing. Marcus opened his mouth to argue. I held up my hand. Describe the letters to me, I said. Not the content. Just what they're like. Marcus frowned. Mine is about responsibility, he said. About carrying on the family legacy. About being strong for others. It sounds like something she'd say to Joel honestly. He's the one who's always struggled with direction, who needed that kind of guidance. And yours, I asked Joel. His voice was rough. It's about being seen. About forgiveness. About not having to be what everyone expects. He looked at his brother. It sounds like something she'd say to Marcus. Exactly, Marcus said. So we swapped them. No, Joel said. The word hung in the air. Marcus stared at his brother. What do you mean, no? Joel picked up his envelope, held it against his chest. Maybe Mom gave us exactly what we needed to hear. Not what we expected. What we needed. Marcus's laugh was sharp. So you think Mom deliberately gave me a letter about being vulnerable, and gave you a letter about being responsible? That's backwards. Is it? Joel asked. The coffee was cooling. None of us had drunk more than a sip. I could see Marcus's frustration building, could see Joel's unexpected stubbornness. These were not the roles they usually played. Marcus was the reasonable one, the one who solved problems. Joel was the difficult one, the one who complicated things. But here was Joel fighting for something, and Marcus struggling to maintain control. I made my decision. You'll read them as addressed, I said. Right now. In my house. Separately. Both brothers turned to stare at me. Benya, Marcus said carefully, I appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter. We don't need to read them here. Yes, I said, you do. Your mother was my closest friend for 43 years. She trusted me with things she didn't trust anyone else. These letters were addressed the way she meant them to be. You'll read them as written, or you'll leave without reading them at all. My voice surprised me with its fierceness. I saw both brothers register it, saw them recalibrate who they thought I was. You can't be serious, Marcus said. I'm entirely serious. Your mother knew what she was doing. She always knew what she was doing. I looked at Joel, then at Marcus. You'll read them separately, without discussing the contents, until I say you can. This is ridiculous, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Then leave, I said. The kitchen fell silent. The clock over the stove ticked. Outside, a cardinal called from the maple tree where Miriam and I used to watch birds while we drank our morning coffee. Joel spoke first. Okay, he said. I'll do it. Marcus looked at his brother, then at me, then at the envelope on the table. His hand went to his tie, adjusting it though it didn't need adjusting. Fine, he said. But I want it on record that I think this is unnecessary. I stood. Noted. I led them out of the kitchen. Marcus would go to the guest bedroom upstairs, the one where he'd slept during summer visits when he was 12 and thought he might become an astronaut. Joel would take the living room, where Miriam used to sit in the afternoon light and read mystery novels, and fall asleep with her book open on her chest. The assignments were deliberate. Both brothers knew it. Marcus paused at the base of the stairs. Benya, he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading, we could just take them home. Read them in private. Come back and talk to you after. No, I said. The word came out harder than I intended. Your mother trusted me with this. You'll honor that or you'll leave. Right now. Something in my tone stopped him. Maybe he heard Miriam in it, the way she could shut down an argument with a single syllable. He nodded slowly, picked up his envelope, started up the stairs. Joel stood in the living room doorway. He was looking at Miriam's chair, the green one with the worn arms, the one no one had sat in since the funeral. She knew, didn't she? He said quietly. She knew we'd fight about this. Yes, I said. She knew. He nodded and crossed the threshold into the living room. I watched him sit in his mother's chair, watched him smooth the envelope on his lap. His hands were shaking. I positioned myself in the hallway between both rooms, equidistant. I could hear Marcus moving around upstairs, the creak of the third stair under his weight. I could sense Joel in the living room, motionless. The house fell into the kind of silence that only comes when people are about to read words that will change them. I thought about Miriam's hands addressing these envelopes, pictured her at her kitchen table, the good stationery spread before her, the black pen she saved for important things. She would have written them carefully, knowing these might be the last words her sons would hear from her, knowing they had to count. I heard the sound of paper tearing, once from upstairs, once from the living room, almost synchronized, as if the brothers were still connected by some invisible cord. Then nothing. Just the quality of silence that comes when people are reading words that hurt. I held my breath. Wondered if I'd done the right thing. Wondered if Miriam would have approved or if I'd overstepped, claimed authority I had no right to claim. The doubt crept in like cold water. The house held its breath with me. 45 minutes passed. I knew because I watched the clock, counted the minutes, tried not to imagine what the letters said, tried not to think about what Miriam might have told each son, what truth she'd saved for after her death, what confessions or accusations or absolutions she'd written in her clear, firm hand. I went to the kitchen and made cardamom tea. Miriam had taught me how, the year she'd spent in India in her 20s, before she'd married and had sons and settled into the life that would shape and contain her. Cardamom pods crushed and steeped, honey stirred in, the smell warm and slightly sharp. Joel emerged first. His face was carefully blank, but his eyes were red-rimmed. He placed the letter back in its envelope with the precision of someone trying to control shaking hands. Creased it exactly along the original folds. Set it on the kitchen table like it might explode. I poured tea. Pushed the cup toward him. He wrapped his hands around it like he was freezing, though the kitchen was warm. Marcus came down 15 minutes later. He moved differently, slower. as if he'd aged in the guest bedroom. His face was composed, but there was something new in his posture, some weight he hadn't been carrying before. He wouldn't look at Joel. I poured him tea, set it in front of him. The smell of cardamom filled the kitchen, and I saw Joel's face crack slightly, saw him swallow hard. Marcus noticed too. Looked away deliberately. "Do you understand?" I asked, "why she gave you those letters?" Neither brother answered. The silence stretched. Then Joel nodded, just barely, just enough to see if you were watching for it. "I need to think," Marcus said. The letters lay on the table between them. I could see Marcus's eyes drift to Joel's envelope, then away, then back. Could see the wanting in his face, the desperate need to know what his mother had told his brother. "Those letters were meant for you as written," I said. "They're complete. You don't need to know what the other one says." But even as I spoke, I knew I'd made a mistake. Saw it in the way both brothers looked at each other's envelopes. The prohibition hung in the air like a dare. Joel's hands trembled around his teacup. Marcus's wedding ring tapped against the porcelain. That same nervous rhythm. Neither of them drank. I'd made the letters forbidden. Made them irresistible. Outside, the afternoon was turning golden. They'd been in my house for 2 hours. It felt like much longer, like we'd crossed some threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. Marcus stood first. "I should go," he said. "Thank you for the tea. And for making us read them as written. You were right. Mom knew what she was doing." But his hand on the table was white-knuckled. His eyes kept sliding to Joel's envelope. Joel stood too. "I'll walk out with you," he said. They gathered their envelopes. Moved toward the door with the careful choreography of people trying not to touch. I followed them out onto the porch. Marcus paused at the top of the steps. "Actually," he said to Joel, "I'm going to head out. You take your time. I know you probably want a few minutes." "Sure," Joel said. His voice was too casual. "I'll just sit for a bit." Marcus nodded. Walked to his car. I followed him down the driveway. "You were right," he said again as he opened the car door. "Mom knew what she was doing. The letter was meant for me. I can see that now." His hand on the door was shaking. I watched him drive away. Walked back to the porch where Joel sat in the second chair, Miriam's chair, staring after his brother's car. I sat beside him. The porch swing creaked under my weight. The maple tree filtered the late afternoon sun into moving patterns on the wooden boards. "What happens?" Joel asked quietly. "If you learn something about yourself you can't unknow. That's called growing up," I said. "Even when you're 40 years old." He nodded. The envelope sat in his lap. He smoothed it with his thumb over and over. "What happens," he said, "if you learn something about someone else?" My blood went cold. I understood then what I'd done. By forbidding them from reading each other's letters, I'd made them desperate to do exactly that. The wondering would eat at them. The not knowing would become unbearable. Joel was already thinking about it. I could see it in his face, in the way he looked at the empty driveway where his brother had been. I wanted to say something. Wanted to reinforce the prohibition, make it stronger, make it stick. But the words died in my throat. Because maybe this was what Miriam intended. Maybe she'd known they'd be desperate to cross this boundary. Maybe the forbidden thing was the point. Or maybe I just made a terrible mistake. Joel stood. "I should go," he said. "Thank you for making me read it. For making both of us read them." He walked to his car. A different car than Marcus's, parked on the opposite side of the street. They'd driven separately. Of course they had. I watched them both drive away, Marcus first, Joel 5 minutes later. Each of them carrying their envelope. Each of them carrying whatever truth Miriam had given them. Each of them burning to know what she'd told the other. I stood on my porch as the sun slanted through the maple tree. The same tree where Miriam and I had sat countless afternoons, watching the seasons change, watching her sons grow up, watching the years accumulate like leaves. They would disobey me. I knew it with absolute certainty. The prohibition I'd created would drive them to it. They would find a way to read each other's letters. I just didn't know if that was what Miriam had wanted all along, or if I'd undone everything she tried to build with her final words. The doubt settled in my chest, heavy and cold. The porch swing creaked in the evening breeze. Miriam's chair sat empty beside me. I had set something in motion. I just didn't know what. The kitchen smelled of cardamom and late afternoon light. I ground the pods in my mother's brass mortar, the one she brought from Tehran in 1978 with almost nothing else. The pestle made a sound like small bones breaking. Rhythmic, meditative, a way to mark time passing while I waited for whatever would emerge from upstairs and the sunroom. I told myself I was making tea, that this was just hospitality, just the ordinary work of tending. But my hand was too tight on the pestle. The cardamom was already powder. I kept grinding anyway. 45 minutes had passed since I'd sent them to their separate corners. 45 minutes of silence from above and behind. I caught myself listening between each stroke of the pestle, listening for footsteps, for a chair scraping, for anything. But the house gave me nothing except my own breathing and the whisper of winter wind against the windows. The light was changing. That particular quality of January afternoon when everything looks both sharp and distant. The sink, the counter, my own hands. All of it clear as glass but somehow unreachable. I set down the mortar and wiped cardamom dust from my palms. Miriam's hands had been so thin 3 months ago. I'd watched her fold the letters at this same table, her fingers deliberate despite the tremor. She'd said something I didn't quite catch. Something about gifts that hurt before they heal. I'd been running water for tea and the kettle was loud. When I turned around to ask her to repeat it, she was sealing the second envelope. The conversation had closed. I should have asked her to repeat it. The thought came with a familiar weight. All the things I should have asked Miriam, should have pressed her to explain. But she'd had a way of making you feel that questions were a kind of violence. That trust meant accepting her silences. Even when those silences held knives you wouldn't see until they were already cutting. I took down 3 cups from the cabinet, set them in a row on the counter, then stood there looking at the third one, my hand still raised. Would they sit together when this was done? Would they want to stay to talk, to make sense of what they'd read? Or would they take their separate wounds and retreat to separate lives, the way they'd done for years already? I didn't know. Miriam had set something in motion and I was just the mechanism, the hand that delivered the blow she'd designed. The third cup sat there on the counter, an accusation or a hope. I heard David's footsteps first, that uneven gait from the soccer injury he'd gotten at 16. I knew it instantly. The slight drag of the left foot, the compensating rhythm. He was coming down the hall toward the kitchen. The sound was slow, reluctant. I turned to face the doorway and made my spine straight, made my face calm. This was the performance Miriam had needed from me. Certainty when I felt none. Authority I hadn't earned. The footsteps stopped just outside the kitchen. I could feel him there, gathering himself. Then he stepped through the doorway. David held the letter in both hands like something that might shatter or explode. His face was carefully blank, but his body told the truth. Shoulders curved inward, head slightly bowed. The posture of someone who'd been struck and was still deciding whether to fall. I didn't speak. I picked up the kettle and poured water over cardamom and tea leaves. The steam rose between us. I set a cup on the table within his reach. He moved toward it slowly, sat down without looking at me. His hands were still holding the letter, but he placed the cup between his palms instead, as if he needed something warm to anchor to. He stared past me at the window. The glass was starting to show his reflection. Dusk was coming. I sat down across from him. Waited. He drew breath to speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He closed it again and his jaw worked silently. I recognized this silence. I'd seen it before in people who just learned they'd been seen more clearly than they'd known. The particular shock of being understood when you thought you were hidden. He tried again. The same breath, the same opening. Then he stopped and looked down at the letter in his lap. "Where's Marcus?" he finally said. His voice was rough. "Still upstairs," I said. Something crossed his face. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated. A gratitude for the delay. For not having to face his brother yet with whatever he was carrying now. He set the letter on the table face down. The movement was so careful. Deliberate. As if the paper might detonate if handled wrong. He started. Then stopped. "Can I walk in the garden for a minute?" It wasn't really a question. I nodded. He stood and moved toward the back door. Put his hand on the knob. Then paused and looked back at me. His face was still blank, but his eyes were asking something. Permission, maybe. Or forgiveness. Or just acknowledgement that something had broken and we both knew it. I held his gaze and said nothing. He went out into the cold. The letter lay on the table between us. Cream-colored paper, slightly textured. Miriam's handwriting visible through the back. Her distinctive script, the letters tall and narrow. I could see my name in her hand. "Dear Marcus." I didn't touch it. That wasn't my right. But I looked at it. At the way David had set it down so carefully. At the faint impressions where his fingers had gripped the edges. At the single fold line across the middle where he'd opened it. What had Miriam said to Marcus that made David look like that? I poured myself tea and watched through the window as David walked between the bare rose bushes. His coat was unzipped despite the cold. His hands were in his pockets. He was pacing more than walking. 3 steps one direction, turned 3 steps back. A man in a cage of his own making. The teacup made an unsteady sound against the saucer. My hands weren't as steady as I'd thought. 10 minutes passed. The sky darkened another shade. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Marcus was coming down. Heavier than usual. Deliberate. The walk of someone who'd made a decision. I stood and positioned myself at the counter. Performing calm again. My face arranged in careful neutrality. I picked up the kettle even though it was still full. Marcus came through the doorway and stopped. "Where's David?" he said. His voice was tight. Controlled in a way that suggested the control was costing him. "In the garden," I said. Marcus crossed to the window in 3 strides. Looked out at his brother's silhouette among the roses. His body went very still. Not the stillness of peace. The stillness of a hunter watching prey. Or a man watching something he couldn't afford to lose. He stood there for a long moment. Then turned and walked to the table. He placed his letter next to David's. Not carefully. He dropped it. The paper made a small slapping sound against the wood. I watched the 2 letters lying there. David's set down like something precious and dangerous. Marcus's dropped like something he wanted to be rid of. The same cream paper. The same handwriting on the back. But whatever they contained had landed differently. "Did David say anything?" Marcus asked. He was still looking at the letters. "About what he read?" "No," I said. Marcus nodded slowly, deciding whether to believe me. His jaw was tight. He accepted the tea I offered but didn't sit. Just stood there holding the cup. Restless. "She was cruel to do this," he said. The words landed in the room with weight. Not the observation of cruelty. The accusation of it. And the way he said it suggested he meant something specific. not the switching of the letters. Something in the content itself. I waited. Didn't ask. Didn't push. She told him things he didn't need to know, Marcus said. Then caught himself. Looked at me sharply as if he'd revealed too much. I kept my face neutral. But my mind was working. His letter was meant for David, which meant Miriam had written to David about Marcus. And whatever she'd said had been something David didn't know. Something that hurt to learn. And what did she tell you? I asked. About David. Marcus's face closed. He drank his tea standing. Looked out at his brother in the garden. That's between me and her, he said. But his voice said something else. His voice said she told me what I already knew. She told me what I've been protecting him from. She told me the secrets I've been keeping. The silence stretched between us. Outside, David had stopped pacing. He was standing very still among the roses. His breath made small clouds in the cold air. Marcus watched him. I watched Marcus. And I began to understand the shape of what Miriam had done. She hadn't just switched the letters. She'd weaponized what each brother knew about the other. She'd taken the asymmetry between them and made it unbearable. David came in from the garden 20 minutes later. Cold radiated off his coat. Small bits of frost clung to his shoulders. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Marcus at the table. The brothers looked at each other. Something passed between them that I couldn't read. Recognition maybe. Wariness. Something that looked almost like apology, but from both sides at once. David took off his coat slowly, hung it on the back of the chair, sat down across from Marcus with me between them. The letters were still there on the table, face down, parallel but not touching. I poured fresh tea. The ritual gave us all something to do with our hands. The sound of liquid hitting ceramic. The small clink of the lid. The steam rising between us. Marcus broke the silence first. Are you all right? He asked David. Yes, David said. The word meant no. Everything about his face and body meant no. Marcus nodded, as if this was the expected answer. The only possible answer. They were speaking in code. I could hear it. The way brothers do when they've spent a lifetime learning each other's silences. When they've built a language out of what they don't say. I set down the teapot. Looked at both of them. Waited until they were both looking back. Your mother's gift is what you've each read, I said. The letters were meant for you as addressed. Reading the other's letter would be a violation of what Miriam intended. Do you understand? They both nodded. Too quickly. Too easily. Yes, David said. Of course, Marcus said. But I saw David's eyes flick toward Marcus's letter. Just for a second. Then away. I saw Marcus's hand move slightly toward David's letter before he caught himself. Before he forced his hand back to his own cup. The prohibition had done its work. The letters had transformed from documents into forbidden fruit. From something they might have ignored into something they would now hunger for. I'd lit the fuse. I could feel it burning. We should go, Marcus said. But he didn't move. Yeah, David said. But he didn't stand. They sat there. Both of them looking at the letters. Both of them pretending not to. The darkness outside the windows had turned the glass into mirrors. We were all reflected there. 3 people at a table with 2 letters between them. The scene looked like a painting. Something Dutch and ominous. Something about temptation or judgment. I poured more tea. No one was drinking. They moved to the living room an hour later. I'm not sure who suggested it. Maybe no one did. Maybe we all just stood at the same time and drifted toward the softer chairs. The pretense of comfort. The brothers sat on opposite ends of the couch. I took Miriam's chair. The one she'd sat in the last time they'd visited. Before she got too sick to sit anywhere but bed. Neither of them had suggested leaving. That was the thing that told me what was coming. They should have left. Should have taken their letters and gone back to their separate lives. Processed this in private. But they were lingering. Waiting for something. Permission maybe. Or courage. Or for me to leave them alone. The silence in the room had weight. Physical pressure. Like the air before a thunderstorm. David shifted on the couch. Cleared his throat. "Benya," he said. "Would you tell us something about Mom? Something from before we were born?" I recognized deflection when I heard it. But I complied anyway. I told them about Miriam at 20. Wild and certain in a way she'd never been again. How she'd driven to the ocean in the middle of the night because she wanted to see the stars over water. How she'd waited in fully clothed and come back laughing with salt in her hair. "Did she ever talk to you about us?" Marcus interrupted. "About what kind of sons we were?" The question landed carefully. Too carefully. I navigated it the same way. "She spoke of you with love and frustration in equal measure," I said. "The way any mother speaks of her children. You were hers." That was enough and too much at the same time. It wasn't really an answer. They both knew it. But they both accepted it. The letters were no longer on the table. I noticed it suddenly. Each brother had taken his own. Marcus's was in his jacket pocket. I could see the edge of cream paper against the dark fabric. David's was folded in his hand. He was turning it over and over between his fingers. Not reading it. Just touching it. I stood. The movement felt enormous in the quiet room. "I'm going to bed," I said. Watching their faces as I said it. Both brothers protested. Mildly. Politely. "You don't have to," David said. "We're fine here," Marcus said. But beneath the protest I saw relief. A loosening in both their shoulders. "I'm tired," I said. "Stay as long as you like. Lock the door when you go." I climbed the stairs slowly, deliberately, each step a choice I was making. To leave them alone with the temptation I'd forbidden. To withdraw my authority and see what they would do with the space I left. At the top of the stairs I paused. Looked back down at the living room. The two brothers on the couch. The lamps making pools of warm light around them. They weren't looking at each other. They were both looking at the letters in their hands. I went to my bedroom, closed the door, lay down on top of the covers still dressed. The house settled around me. Small creaks and whispers. The sound of old wood adjusting to the cold. I listened past those sounds, listening for the living room, for voices, for movement, silence. Then the sound of paper unfolding. Once. Twice. I closed my eyes. Miriam had set this in motion months ago. When her hands were still strong enough to write. When she could still hold a pen without shaking. She'd written 2 letters and switched them. Knowing what it would do. Knowing her sons. Knowing me. She'd made me the guardian of a boundary she'd known would be crossed. Had wanted crossed. The warning itself was the invitation. I lay there in the dark, listening to the silence that meant transgression. That meant the brothers were reading what they shouldn't read, learning what they weren't meant to know. The boundary was dissolving. I could feel it, like ice cracking under weight, and I couldn't stop it, didn't want to stop it. Had been made complicit in exactly this moment. I waited for the sound of voices. For the confrontation that would come. For whatever Miriam had planted in those letters to finally bloom. The house was very quiet. The kind of quiet that comes just before something breaks. 20 minutes had passed since I'd given my warning. The afternoon light slanted lower through the windows, turning the dust in the air visible. I refilled the tea glasses, noting how the ice settled with small cracks against the glass. The brothers sat too carefully. David had chosen the armchair farthest from the envelopes. Marcus occupied the sofa, his posture correct, his hands folded. Neither looked at each other. Neither looked at the side table where the letters waited. I recognized the quality of their stillness. It was the same tension I'd seen in my own children before they did something I'd forbidden. The same held breath before transgression. David shifted in his chair. His movement had a studied casualness that made my instinct prickle. "Would it be all right if I used your bathroom?" he asked. His voice was too light, too ordinary. I felt the wrongness of the question even as I answered. "Down the hall, second door on the left," I said. My fatigue made me slow. I'd been awake since before dawn, preparing for their arrival. I'd carried my friend's death for months, holding the weight of these letters. I was tired in my bones. David disappeared down the hallway. I returned to my chair and found Marcus staring at the envelopes with an expression I couldn't read. His face had gone very still. His eyes tracked the shape of them, the handwriting visible even from where he sat. I tried to redirect his attention. "Your mother used to tell me stories," I said, "about when you boys were small. There was this one summer when David was maybe 3 and you were 6. She took you to the beach." Marcus made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. His gaze didn't shift from the envelopes. "You built sandcastles for hours," I continued. "She said David kept destroying them and you kept rebuilding. You never got angry. You just started over." Marcus's jaw tightened. He nodded once mechanically. His attention was elsewhere, calculating something I couldn't see. I heard the bathroom door open. The sound carried clearly down the hallway. But no footsteps followed. No water running. Just silence where David's return should have been. Cold certainty settled in my chest. I knew what was happening. I'd known it would happen from the moment David's voice went casual. But knowing and preventing were different things, and I'd been too slow, too tired. The ice in my own tea glass shifted with a small crack. The afternoon light made everything too visible, too sharp. I could see every mote of dust suspended in the air between us. It was already too late to stop gracefully. I rose from my chair. My knees protested the movement. I'd been sitting too long holding vigil over these boys and their mother's final performance. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. My heart beat hard enough that I felt it in my throat. I moved toward the back bedroom, where I'd left Marcus's letter on the dresser. David emerged just as I reached the hallway entrance. He had paper in his hand. His face had gone pale, all the blood drained from his skin. His eyes met mine, and I saw something crumbling in his expression. Behind me I heard movement. I turned to find Marcus standing in the bathroom doorway. He held David's letter, the envelope torn open in his hands. Both brothers froze when they saw me watching. The three of us formed a triangle in the hallway, caught in a moment that couldn't be undone. The letters hung between us like evidence. My impulse was to command them to stop, to use the authority I'd claimed, the certainty I'd performed. But the words died in my throat. They'd already read enough. I could see it in David's shock, in the way his hands trembled around the paper. I could see it in Marcus's defiant relief, the expression of a man who'd carried a secret too long. The damage was done. My intervention would only make me look foolish. I retreated to the kitchen doorway. My hands found the counter edge, gripping the cool laminate. I'd miscalculated something fundamental about these brothers, about their need, about my friend's intentions. I thought I could prevent this explosion. I'd been arrogant in my certainty. The silence before the detonation had a particular quality. It was dense, pressurized. I could hear David's breathing, too fast and shallow. I could hear the rustle of paper in Marcus's shaking hands. Neither brother spoke. Neither moved. They stood in the hallway, holding each other's letters, and I watched from the kitchen doorway like a powerless witness. David's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes moved from the paper to his brother's face and back again. The shock in his expression was giving way to something else. Something harder. Marcus's defiance was cracking at the edges. Guilt crept into his features. But underneath it I saw relief. The terrible relief of a secret finally exposed. I pressed my palms harder against the counter. The cool surface anchored me. I wanted to speak, to mediate, to fix what was breaking. But my usual tools felt useless. This was happening beyond my control. It had always been beyond my control. David finally moved. He walked past me into the living room, still holding the letter. His footsteps were too loud on the hardwood floor. Marcus followed, slower, more reluctant. I stayed in the kitchen doorway. My legs felt unsteady. I'd been so certain I could manage this moment, guide them through it. I'd been so sure I understood what my friend had wanted. Now I understood nothing. David stood in the center of the living room. His voice when he spoke was strange, flat in a way that frightened me more than shouting would have. "How long have you known?" he asked. The question hung in the air. Marcus didn't pretend to misunderstand. The adoption was revealed in those 6 words. David's entire history, rewritten in a single question. Marcus tried to deflect. He started to speak about context, about their mother's reasons. But David cut through it. "How long?" he repeated. His voice was building now, fury replacing the flatness. Marcus's careful control wavered. "Since I was 19, he said. "Mom told me. She made me promise not to tell you. She said it would protect you." David's reaction was physical. He sat down hard in the armchair, then immediately stood again. He started pacing, his movements sharp and agitated. I watched the performance of younger brother visibly shatter in his body language. The role he'd played his entire life was coming apart. The carefully constructed family narrative was crumbling. I tried to interject. I wanted to offer perspective, to explain what their mother might have intended. But both brothers ignored me completely. They were locked in their own reckoning. I was irrelevant to what was unfolding. David's pacing made a rhythm on the hardwood floor. Marcus stood very still, his breathing too careful and controlled. My own heartbeat pounded in my ears. I'd lost control of this moment. I'd never had control of it. David turned suddenly, his movement violent in the small room. He directed his fury at Marcus, but it encompassed more than his brother. It encompassed their mother's memory. "The letters were cruel," he said. His voice cracked on the word. "You stole my history. You let me live a lie for decades." Marcus's control broke. The careful facade he'd maintained since arriving shattered. His voice when he spoke was loud enough to make me flinch. "You were always the favorite," he yelled. "Always protected. You never had to carry the weight of knowing. You never had to watch you every day and decide whether to destroy you with the truth." The brothers' assigned roles emerged in their accusations. David the volatile truth-teller, demanding honesty. Marcus the responsible keeper of secrets, bearing the burden of knowledge. And in their fury, they revealed how much they'd resented their parts. David had hated being treated as fragile, as needing protection. Marcus had hated being made complicit, being given a burden he never asked for. They'd both been performing for decades. The family harmony had been constructed artificial. And underneath it, resentment had grown like rot. I saw it clearly now. My friend had orchestrated exactly this explosion. She'd forced honesty through cruelty. She'd known the letters would be switched, had counted on it. She'd prepared them for this pain and detonated it anyway. I was horrified. I was awed. I didn't know which feeling was stronger. The brothers were still shouting. Their voices filled the small room, too loud, overwhelming. Marcus's face was red. David's hands were fists. I spoke finally. My voice was quiet, but it cut through their fury. I don't know if this was right, I said. Both brothers turned to stare at me. The admission hung between us. I don't know, I repeated. I thought I understood what she wanted. But I don't. My certainty had cracked. The wisdom I'd claimed felt hollow. I was just an old woman who'd lost her friend and didn't understand the game she'd been playing. The brothers stared at me. My doubts seemed to shock them more than their revelations had shocked each other. I twisted my hands in my apron. The letters lay abandoned on furniture like shed skin. The evidence of the mother's design littered the room. But I couldn't tell them what it meant. I couldn't make sense of the wreckage. The shouting stopped. The energy that had fueled their confrontation drained away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. David sank into the armchair. Marcus sat heavily on the sofa. I returned to my own chair. My body felt ancient, every year of my age pressing down. The silence was different now. It wasn't pressurized anymore. It was empty, hollowed out. Early evening light filled the room. The quality of it was softer than the afternoon slant, more forgiving. But it couldn't soften what had happened here. We sat in the wreckage. 3 people implicated in a dead woman's design. None of us with answers. David spoke first. His voice was quiet now, drained of fury. Did you know, he asked me, about the adoption? Yes, I said. But I didn't know Marcus knew. I didn't know she'd told him. The betrayal in David's eyes extended to me. I was part of the construction. I'd helped maintain the lie. Marcus picked up his original letter, the one that had been meant for David. His hands were steadier now, but his voice was rough. He read aloud. She wrote about the courage to live without performance, about choosing authenticity even when it destroys what came before. David retrieved his own original letter, the one Marcus had read in the bathroom. He found a passage and read it quietly. Blood versus choice in family, he said. She wrote that the bonds we choose are stronger than the ones we're born with. That I needed to understand the difference. The brothers looked at each other. For the first time since the explosion, they really saw each other. And slowly, they began to understand. Their mother had prepared them for exactly this pain. She'd known the letters would be switched. She'd written each letter with the knowledge that the wrong brother would read it first. She'd orchestrated the explosion and the aftermath. The realization settled over all of us. The mother's intention was both cruel and loving. She'd destroyed their constructed harmony to force them toward something more honest. But whether that was right, whether truth was worth the cost, remained unanswered. I spoke about my friend, about her capacity for both love and ruthlessness, about how she'd never chosen the easy path when she believed the hard one was necessary. I can't say whether this was right, I told them, only that it was deliberate. She knew what she was doing. The brothers sat with the wreckage. They held their letters, the ones meant for each other. The light continued to fade outside. Marcus's hands were in his lap, his shoulders curved forward. David stared at nothing, his face showing all the years of performance falling away. I felt my own exhaustion like a weight. I'd spent months preparing for this moment. I'd believed I understood my friend's intentions. I'd been certain I could guide these boys through her final lesson. But I'd been wrong about so much. I'd thought I could prevent the explosion. I'd thought I could control the damage. I'd thought I knew whether my friend's design was wisdom or cruelty. Now I sat in the ruins of my certainty. The truth had been forced into the open. The brothers' constructed roles had shattered. And I couldn't say whether anything better would grow from this destruction. The tea in the glasses had gone cold. The ice had melted completely. The letters lay limp from handling, their paper softened. David broke the silence. His voice was raw, scraped clean of performance. "What do we do now?" he asked. Neither Marcus nor I had an answer. The question hung in the air with all the others. How do you rebuild after forced honesty? How do you forgive a dead woman for loving you ruthlessly? How do you become brothers again when the roles you've played have been destroyed? Marcus looked at his brother. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time in decades. I saw something shift in his expression. Not forgiveness yet. Not understanding. But the beginning of willingness to try. The mother had brought them to this edge. She'd detonated their constructed harmony. She'd forced them to see each other without the protective roles they'd performed. But she'd also prepared them. The letters they'd read, the wrong letters, had given them tools. David had learned about blood versus choice. Marcus had learned about the courage to live without performance. Whether those tools would be enough remained to be seen. I thought about my friend. About the woman I'd known for 40 years. She'd been capable of great tenderness and great ruthlessness. She'd loved her sons enough to destroy their comfortable lies. I still didn't know if that was love or cruelty. I suspected both. I suspected the question itself was too simple for what she'd done. The brothers sat in the wreckage. The letters revealed that their mother had known this would happen. She'd prepared them for it. She'd given them the tools they'd need. But no one was certain whether the forced truth was love or cruelty. No one could see a clear path forward through the ruins of their constructed family. The evening light faded. The room grew dimmer. We sat together in the uncertainty. 3 people trying to make meaning from deliberate destruction. And the question of whether this was love remained open, unanswered, impossible to resolve. Marcus was standing. Joel remained seated, but his body was coiled like something about to spring. I watched them from the doorway, not quite blocking the exit, not quite allowing passage. Marcus reached for his jacket where it hung on the back of the chair. His movements were precise, controlled. He spoke in that clipped administrative voice he used when things were falling apart, about needing space, about processing, about reconvening when everyone was calmer. Joel's laugh was ugly. "You're doing it right now," Joel said. "You're performing even now. You're managing the situation like it's a fucking board meeting." Marcus's hand stilled on the jacket. "I'm trying to prevent us from saying things we can't take back." "Too late," Joel said. "Way too fucking late for that." I moved to the kitchen. My hands found the coffee canister, the filters, the familiar rhythm of preparation. The sound of water filling the pot was too loud in the silence. I didn't ask them to stay. I just created noise, normalcy, a reason to remain in the same 4 walls for a few more minutes. Joel's attention swiveled to me. "You told us to read them," he said. "You sat there and told us we needed to read those fucking letters. You knew what was in them." I measured coffee grounds with steady hands. "I did know," I said. "And you thought what, exactly? That this would help? That blowing up our entire understanding of our family was some kind of gift?" I didn't answer. The coffee maker began its gurgling protest. Joel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You don't get to just, make coffee and pretend this is fixable with your kitchen table wisdom. You facilitated this. You're complicit in whatever the fuck Mom was trying to do." I turned to face him. "Yes," I said. "I am." The agreement seemed to deflate something in him. He'd been prepared for defense, for justification. My simple acknowledgement left him nowhere to direct the fury. Marcus was still standing by his chair, one hand on the jacket, frozen mid-departure. The afternoon light made the dust visible in the air between us. Everything looked suspended, particles caught in amber. The silence that followed Joel's outburst was unbearable. Pressed against the walls, it filled our lungs. It made the simple act of breathing feel like a choice we each had to consciously make. Marcus sat back down. Not reconciliation. Not readiness to talk. Just exhaustion. His body folded into the chair like something that had been holding its shape through will alone, and finally couldn't anymore. I brought the coffee to the table. 3 cups. I didn't ask if anyone wanted it. The ceramic made small sounds against the wood as I set them down. None of us reached for them. The smell cut through the tension. Dark and bitter and ordinary. The kind of smell that belonged to normal afternoons, to conversations that didn't end in wreckage. We sat there in the debris of what the letters had demolished. The dust continued its slow dance in the light. My spoon clinked against the side of my cup as I added sugar I didn't need, just for something to do with my hands. Outside, a car passed. Someone's normal day continuing while ours had splintered into pieces on my living room floor. 20 minutes passed. Maybe 30. Time had gone strange, elastic. The rage had spent itself into something quieter, but no less dangerous. The kind of hurt that goes underground and changes the foundation. I needed to understand what Miriam had been trying to accomplish. Not to defend it, but to make sense of it. My friend had done this deliberately. She'd chosen this specific cruelty with the same care. She'd chosen everything else in her life. "Can I see the letters again?" I asked. Joel's response was immediate. No. His hand moved to his lap where he'd been clutching the pages. Protective. Like the letter itself had become the wound and he needed to keep it close. Marcus slid his across the table without a word. The paper whispered against the wood. His face was blank, detached, the expression of someone who'd stepped outside their own pain to watch it from a distance. I picked up Marcus's letter. The paper was soft from handling, the creases already wearing thin. I found the passage I remembered from my own reading weeks ago, when Miriam had still been alive, and I'd thought I understood what she was doing. I read aloud. She wrote about Joel's character here, I said. About his inability to accept comfort, his need to earn everything twice over. About how he'd never believed good things were meant for him. I looked up at Joel. "These are things only a mother would know," I said. "The kind of intimacy you can't fake." Joel's jaw was tight. Anyone could observe that about me. Could they? I asked. Could anyone see that you count the compliments people give you and subtract half because you assume they're being kind? That you apologize before asking for things you're entitled to? That you've never once in your life accepted help without finding a way to repay it with interest? The specificity landed. I watched it hit him, watched his certainty waver. Marcus was staring at the letter now. His finger traced the edge of the paper, but didn't touch the words themselves. Joel's voice was quieter when he spoke again. "How do I know any of it was real if the person who wrote it wasn't even my mother?" Marcus flinched. The movement was small but visible. The first crack in his careful armor. "She was your mother," Marcus said. "Biology doesn't change that." "Doesn't it?" Joel shot back. "Isn't that exactly what it changes? Everything?" I set the letter down carefully. "I need to tell you something about the last time I saw her," I said. "Your mother. In the hospital." They both looked at me. Waiting. She was too weak to write by then. Could barely hold a pen. But she kept talking about these letters. Not letters in general. These specific letters. The ones addressed to each of you. I paused, remembering Miriam's face in that hospital bed. The way her eyes had been fierce even when the rest of her was failing. "She made me promise they'd be delivered in the right envelopes," I said. Marcus's letter to Marcus. Joel's letter to Joel. She was very specific about that. The implication settled over them. This hadn't been confusion, hadn't been the morphine or the disease scrambling her thoughts. This had been calculated, deliberate, a choice made with full consciousness of what it would detonate. Marcus spoke so quietly I almost missed it. She talked about truth and lies those last weeks, he said. About protection that becomes prison. Joel turned to look at his brother. What? In the hospital, Marcus said. When you weren't there. She kept saying she'd protected us from too much. That she'd built walls to keep us safe. And then couldn't figure out how to let us out. The scope of Miriam's intention was beginning to emerge. Not clearly, not completely, but in fragments. Like watching a photograph develop in chemical baths, the image appearing slowly from nothing. What else did she say? I asked. Marcus shook his head. I thought it was just, end-of-life stuff. People getting philosophical when they're dying. I didn't think she was planning this. He gestured at the letters on the table, at the wreckage they created. The coffee had gone cold in our cups. The light through the window had shifted, grown longer, more golden. Evening was coming whether we were ready for it or not. Joel picked up his letter finally. He didn't read it, just held it. The paper looked fragile in his hands. She knew, he said. She knew exactly what these would do. Yes, I said. Think she did. I stood and moved to the kitchen sink. The coffee cups needed washing even though we'd barely touched them. I needed my hands to do something other than grip the edge of the table. Through the doorway I could see the brothers in the living room. They'd gone still again, watching me, waiting for me to tell them what to do next, how to process this, what it all meant. I turned on the water, began washing cups that weren't really dirty. The last time I saw Miriam, I said to the window, she asked me if I thought she'd been a good mother. The water ran over my hands. Too hot, but I didn't adjust it. I told her what I thought she needed to hear. I continued. About legacy and love. About how her boys had turned out. All the things you say to someone who's dying. I set the first cup in the drainer. Reached for the second. Now I wonder if I should have just listened instead, I said. If she was trying to tell me something and I was too busy reassuring her to hear it. The silence from the living room felt different now. Attentive. Joel's voice cut through the sound of running water. What do you think we should do, Benya? I turned off the tap. Turned to face them, my hands still wet and dripping. I don't know, I said. The admission hung in the air between us. In all the years I'd known these boys, through all their questions and crises and visits to this kitchen, I had never once said those words to them. I don't know what you should do, I said again. I don't know what your mother wanted. I don't know if what she did was right or wrong or both. I just don't know. Something in the room shifted. The temperature changed. I moved to the kitchen table, the one in the small breakfast nook separate from where they sat. I lowered myself into the chair. My hands were still wet. I hadn't bothered with a towel. The grief hit me then. Not for them, not for the situation, but for Miriam herself. For my friend who had carried these secrets and made these impossible choices. For the woman who had orchestrated this explosion, and then died before seeing whether it would destroy or save her sons. I cried. Not gracefully. Not quietly. The kind of crying that comes from the center of your chest and empties you out. The brothers didn't move. Didn't come to comfort me. Didn't speak. They just witnessed it. My grief for their mother, who I'd thought I'd known and now realized I'd maybe never understood at all. The late afternoon light made everything look temporary. Like if you blinked, the whole scene might dissolve and reform into something different. I heard water still running in the sink behind me. I'd forgotten to turn it off completely. The waste of it, the small sound of it, somehow made me cry harder. This was what Miriam had left us with. This wreckage. This uncertainty. This terrible, beautiful, impossible mess. And she'd known. She'd known exactly. Eventually the crying stopped. My breathing evened out. The light had gone from gold to amber, the particular quality of early evening that makes everything look both more beautiful and more fragile. I heard movement from the living room, the brothers shifting, settling. When I finally looked up, they were sitting together rather than in opposition. Not close, but not actively avoiding each other either. Benya had turned on a single lamp. The rest of the room was filling with shadow. Marcus started to speak. His voice was careful, measured. He talked about when he'd learned about the adoption. He was 12. Their mother had told him during a drive to baseball practice, of all times. Casual, like it was information rather than a bomb. Joel interrupted. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus's hands were in his lap, fingers laced together. "I wanted to," he said. "1,000 times I wanted to. But you didn't," Joel said. "No," Marcus agreed. "I didn't. Because Mom told you not to," Joel said. "Because you always did what Mom told you." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Because I didn't know how," he said. "Because you were 8 and I was 12, and how do you tell your little brother something like that?" "You just do," Joel said. "You just fucking say it." "Do I?" Marcus asked. "Do I just say it?" "When?" "During which of your childhood crises?" "When you were struggling in school. When you were being bullied. When Dad died and you couldn't sleep for 6 months." The questions landed like blows. Joel didn't have answers for them. Benya spoke into the silence. "Joel, what do you wish Marcus had done differently?" Joel opened his mouth, closed it again. The anger was still there, but it was running into something more complicated. "I wish," Joel started, then stopped. "I wish he hadn't decided for me what I could handle." Marcus leaned forward. "I didn't decide that," he said. "Mom did. She decided what you could handle. She decided what I could handle. She decided everything." The shift was subtle but unmistakable. The target of Joel's anger was moving. "She always decided," Joel said slowly. "What we knew. When we knew it. How we knew it." Marcus nodded. "Every story. Every silence. She constructed all of it." They were talking to each other now instead of at each other. Interrogating their mother's choices across decades. The careful architecture of the family she'd built and maintained and controlled. Joel said something bitter about maternal love being indistinguishable from manipulation. About how every hug had been calculated, every praise measured out in exact doses to achieve specific results. Marcus looked at his brother. Then, surprisingly, he agreed. I watched them find this common ground. Watched them align against their mother for the first time in their lives. 2 sons examining the woman who'd raised them, seeing her clearly maybe for the first time. And I recognized Miriam's strategy. She'd made herself the target. Deliberately sacrificed her own memory, her legacy, the way her sons would think of her forever. She'd taken all that love and twisted it into something they could be angry at together. She'd given them a common enemy. And the enemy was her. The single lamp cast shadows across their faces. Outside, evening was settling into full dark. The letters lay on the table between them now. Not shields anymore. Just paper. Just evidence. "This is what she wanted," I said. They both turned to look at me. "For you to be angry at her," I continued. "Together. On the same side." Marcus's expression was unreadable. Joel's was pure resistance. "That's," Joel started. "That's a fucked up thing to want." "Yes," I said. "It is. But I thought about Miriam in that hospital bed. About the fierceness in her eyes when she talked about the letters. About protection that becomes prison. She'd loved them enough to make them hate her. At least for a while. At least until they could see past the anger to what lay beneath." The brothers looked at each other. Really looked, maybe for the first time all afternoon. Something fundamental had shifted. I couldn't name it, couldn't point to the exact moment. But the quality of the silence between them had changed. The conversation wound down to nothing. We'd been sitting in this room for hours. The talking had exhausted itself, but no one moved to leave. I began to gather the letters. My hands were steady now. Marcus's voice stopped me. "Do you think she knew this would happen?" he asked. "The explosion, the anger, all of it." I set the letters back down. "Yes," I said. "I think Miriam knew exactly." Joel asked the harder question. "Do you think it was worth it?" I was silent. The question deserved real consideration, not a reflexive answer. I thought about my friend, about the boys she'd raised, about the impossible choices mothers make and the prices they pay. "I'll know when you know," I said finally. Maybe not even then. The brothers stood. Not together. Marcus first, then Joel. But they paused in that standing, some invisible thread connecting them. Marcus spoke to Joel. Not looking at him, looking at the floor. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not for keeping the secret. For thinking I got to choose. For deciding what you could handle." Joel was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Not acceptance. Not forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. I walked them to the door. Watched them move to separate cars in the driveway. They didn't embrace. Didn't make plans to talk. Didn't promise anything. But before getting in his car, Marcus looked at Joel. And Joel looked back. Just that. Just the looking. Then engines started. Headlights cut through the darkness. I watched the taillights disappear down the street. One turning left, one turning right. I went back inside. Back to the living room where the empty coffee cups still sat on the table. Where the letters were scattered across the wood. Where the single lamp still burned against the gathering dark. I sat down in the wreckage. I didn't clean it up. Didn't put the cups in the dishwasher, or fold the letters back into their envelopes. I just sat there in the middle of what Miriam had orchestrated, what I had facilitated, what had exploded across this ordinary afternoon. My breathing was the only sound. In and out. The simple animal fact of it. The letters remained on the table. Their work wasn't finished. I could feel that. Whatever Miriam had set in motion was still unfolding, still working its way through the systems of these two men's lives. I thought I understood my friend, thought I knew what she was doing. Now I wondered if I'd known her at all. Or maybe I'd known her too well. Maybe that was worse. The lamp cast shadows on the wall. The coffee cups held the last cold dregs. The letters lay where I'd left them, patient and terrible. Outside, the night continued. Somewhere, two brothers were driving through it, separate, changed, carrying their mother's final gift like a wound that might become a door. I sat in the silence and waited. For what, I didn't know. But Miriam had taught me this much. Sometimes the waiting is the point. Sometimes you have to sit in the wreckage and trust that something is being built in the breaking. The letters knew something I didn't. My friend had known something I was only beginning to glimpse. And the real lesson, I suspected, had been meant for me all along. The silence after violence has its own texture. It settles like dust, fine and pervasive, coating everything. I watched the brothers exist in separate exhaustions. Marcus slumped in the armchair where he'd listened to his mother's voice. Joel on the floor with his back against the wall, spine curved like he was trying to make himself smaller. The envelopes lay scattered on the coffee table between them like debris from an explosion. The late afternoon light slanted through the west windows, turning everything amber. The quality of light that made you aware of time passing, of the earth turning. I'd seen this light every day for 30 years in this house, but today it felt different, heavy with witness. I stood, joints protesting. My body remembered I was 73 even when my mind forgot. The teacups needed gathering, a return to physical ritual, something my hands could do while my heart tried to understand what had just happened. Joel's eyes tracked my movement. Then his gaze slid to the coffee table, but not to the envelope he'd read second, the one meant for his brother. To his original letter, the cream-colored paper catching the amber light, making it seem to glow from within. Marcus shifted in the armchair. His voice came out rough, unpracticed. He asked about their mother's handwriting, something specific about how she formed her capital K, whether it had always looped back on itself like that or if it was just in these letters. The question surprised me. It meant he'd been looking, really looking. Not just reading words but studying the physical act of their formation. Joel answered before I could. Said she'd always written her K's like that, ever since they were kids. Said he remembered watching her write his name on his lunch bags, that same loop. The conversation felt fragile. Two men talking about handwriting when what they meant was, our mother touched this paper, formed these letters, knew we would read them. She was here and now she's not. I recognized the opening, the question underneath the question. They were looking for a way back to the letters without admitting they needed to. I suggested quietly that they might read again what was written for them. Now that they knew what they knew. Now that the secrets had detonated and they were still breathing in the aftermath. Joel reached for his envelope first. His hand hesitated above it, trembling slightly. Marcus watched him do it and something passed between them, some small permission. Then Marcus reached for his own envelope, the one with his name in his mother's handwriting, the capital M with its careful peaks. I retreated to the kitchen doorway, giving them privacy but remaining present, because sometimes the most important witness is the one who knows when not to speak. The smell of cold tea drifted up from the cups in my hands. The paper unfolded with that specific whisper, intimate and irrevocable. I'd moved to Miriam's old rocking chair without quite deciding to. My body remembered her there, the way she'd sit when she visited, working her crochet while we talked. The chair held the shape of her, or maybe I just imagined it did. Time became elastic as the brothers read. Minutes stretched and compressed. Could have been 20 minutes, could have been an hour. The light continued its slow shift toward evening, and I watched their faces for signs of what the letters were revealing. Marcus made a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. He read a passage again, his finger tracing the words as if checking they were really there, as if the letters might rearrange themselves when he wasn't looking. Joel's hand shook. He held the letter carefully, like something that might crumble. I saw him mouth words their mother had written, testing them aloud silently, tasting the shape of them. Marcus spoke first. His voice was different now, smaller. He read aloud about their mother knowing this day would come, about Joel having to read the truth in paper before he could hear it from his brother. She'd written, "You won't believe him when he tells you, because you'll think he's trying to hurt you. So I'm telling you first, my Joel. I'm telling you the truth so you can hear the love underneath when he finally speaks." Joel's breath caught. He looked down at his own letter, then read a section meant for Marcus. Their mother writing about the burden of knowing, about how she'd asked him to carry a secret that wasn't his to carry. The words, "I made you the keeper of something that should never have been kept. I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry. But you need to understand when you tell him, and you will tell him because you're too honest to keep lying forever, it won't be your failure. It was always mine." The brothers looked at each other. The realization dawned simultaneously. I could see it in their faces. Their mother had written both letters knowing they would eventually read both. She prepared each son not just for what he needed to hear, but for what he would learn about the other. My voice surprised me when it came. Rough from disuse, from holding silence. I told them what I hadn't said before, What Miriam had sworn me not to reveal until this moment. That she'd been dying for months. That the cancer had given her time to plan this precisely. Every word calculated. Every revelation timed. She'd known exactly what she was doing. The rocking chair creaked as I shifted. The brothers' voices reading their mother's words filled the room where she used to visit, where we'd drunk tea and talked about everything except the secret she was carrying. The weight of her intentionality pressed down on all of us. This wasn't manipulation. This was love doing what love must do when it knows it's running out of time. I'd moved them to the kitchen table without quite asking. Just started making fresh tea, putting out the plate of rugula I'd made for Miriam's Shiva that never happened. The brothers followed like men in a trance, still holding their letters. The quality of light was changing. Early evening now, the amber fading to blue. I turned on the lamp over the table, the one with the stained glass shade Miriam had given me 20 years ago. The light scattered into colors across the wooden surface. Joel asked Marcus directly when he'd found out about the adoption. His voice was steady but his hands weren't. They wrapped around the teacup like it was the only solid thing in the world. Marcus answered truthfully. The week before Joel's wedding, he said. Their mother drunk on wine and grief, their father 3 months dead. She'd told him in this kitchen actually, at Sophie's old house before she moved. Said she couldn't carry it alone anymore. Needed someone to know. Made him promise not to tell. Joel's face did something complicated. He asked why Marcus hadn't told him then, before the wedding, before he married Sophie with a lie sitting at the center of his family. Marcus looked down at his hands. Said it wasn't nobility, the keeping of the secret. Said it was cowardice, pure and simple. Fear of destroying Joel's idea of family, of losing the only brother he had. Said he'd told himself he was protecting Joel when really he was protecting himself from being the one who broke everything. The honesty was startling. No performance in it, no careful management. Just the raw admission of his own weakness. Joel admitted he'd always felt the difference. The way their mother looked at him versus Marcus, the way she touched him, held him. Said he'd told himself for years he was imagining it, being paranoid, needing too much. But the feeling had never gone away, that sense of being slightly other, slightly outside. They talked about their father then. About how he died knowing Joel wasn't his biological son but loving him anyway. Choosing him every day. Marcus said their father had told him once years ago when Marcus was maybe 12, that love was a decision you made every morning. That blood didn't make you family, choice did. The conversation fractured and repaired. Joel stood up once, said he needed to leave, couldn't do this. Then sat back down. Marcus's voice broke twice and he had to stop, breathe, start again. I said almost nothing but I stayed. My presence was tether, anchor, the third point that kept them from flying apart. Marcus told Joel something he'd never said before. A specific memory from childhood when they were maybe 8 and 10. Joel had won some award at school, and their mother had been so proud, made such a fuss. Marcus had felt this terrible jealousy, this hot resentment, had wished Joel would fail at something, anything, just so Marcus could be the good son for once. He offered this now, this evidence of ugliness, as proof that their brotherhood was real. You don't resent someone you don't love, he said. You don't spend 40 years carrying guilt about a moment of childhood jealousy, unless that person matters more than almost anything. Joel's eyes were wet. He reached across the table, not quite touching Marcus's hand but close. Said he'd resented Marcus too, the easy way their parents loved him, the way he fit so perfectly into the family shape. Said maybe all brothers felt that, biological or not. The cardamom tea had gone cold in our cups. The rugula crumbled under nervous fingers, leaving trails of cinnamon sugar on the table. Chairs scraped as bodies shifted between staying and going. the physical restlessness of people doing something harder than they knew how to do. This wasn't reconciliation. This was messier than that, more uncertain. But it was real in a way nothing between them had been real in years, maybe ever. Full dark now. The visit that had begun in afternoon light was ending in night. The brothers gathered their things in the awkward choreography of people who'd arrived together but would leave apart. Joel asked if he could take both letters. His and the one meant for Marcus. Something in his voice made it a real question, not a demand. Marcus agreed, then asked Joel to send him photos of them. Said he wanted to be able to read his mother's words to his brother. Wanted to understand what she'd seen that he'd missed. The small negotiation suggested future contact. Not a promise but a possibility. Marcus left first. He paused at the door, turned back to me. Said something about their mother, about how she must have trusted me to hold this space. His voice carried weight, gratitude mixed with something like awe. I felt the heaviness of that trust, the responsibility Miriam had placed on me without asking if I wanted it. Joel lingered. He helped me carry cups to the kitchen, stacking them by the sink with careful precision. Then he asked what happens now, his voice small. I told him honestly that I didn't know. That his mother had given them the truth but not the map for what to do with it. He nodded like he'd expected that answer. Like he was learning as I was learning that some gifts come without instructions. From the window, I watched them stand by their separate cars in the driveway. Not speaking but not quite leaving either. The space between them held something, tension or possibility or both. Finally Joel raised a hand, something between wave and benediction. Marcus returned it, the same uncertain gesture. Both cars pulled away. Marcus turned left toward the highway, toward his life in the city. Joel turned right toward town, toward whatever came next. I stood at the window watching their taillights disappear in different directions. Red lights swallowed by darkness. The cold air that had come in when they opened the door still lingered. The silence after they'd gone was absolute. I moved through the room collecting the physical evidence of the day. Teacups with their rings of dried tea at the bottom. The plate with rugula crumbs and smears of chocolate. A napkin Joel had folded into nervous triangles, the creases sharp and precise. My hands worked automatically, clearing, tidying, restoring order. But my mind was elsewhere, trying to process what had happened, what it meant. I found myself crying. Not the controlled tears I'd permitted myself at Miriam's funeral, the appropriate grief of a close friend. This was rawer, Messier. Grief mixed with gratitude and humility, the kind of crying that comes from being fundamentally changed. At the kitchen sink, washing dishes, I remembered specific moments with Miriam. Conversations about the boys, about motherhood. About what we owe the people we love and what we don't. She'd asked me once what I would do if I knew I was dying, what truths I'd tell, what silences I'd break.
Idean suarat abstragli, tauraticali.
Not knowing she was asking from the center of her own ending. She'd been preparing me too. All those conversations, all that time. Knowing I would be the one to hold this impossible day. She'd taught me without telling me she was teaching, the way she always had. The realization broke something open in my chest. Miriam's final gift wasn't just to her sons. It was to me too, this lesson about the limits of wisdom, about trusting people to carry what they must carry. I wrapped myself in the Afghan Miriam had crocheted. The one she'd made me for my 70th birthday. Took it out to the back porch to the cold night air. The weather had finally cleared, stars visible for the first time in days. The sky was enormous. Stars scattered across darkness like thrown salt. The kind of clarity that comes after storm, everything washed clean and sharp. I spoke aloud to my dead friend. Not prayer exactly, I'd never been good at prayer. But acknowledgement, gratitude. Thanked her for the lesson about certainty, about control. about love that doesn't solve but transforms. Told her I understood now what she'd been trying to teach me. That I couldn't fix people, couldn't smooth their paths, couldn't spare them their necessary pain. That wisdom wasn't about knowing what people needed. It was about trusting them to find their own way through. Even when the path was dark and uncertain, told her I missed her. That I wished she'd trusted me with the truth earlier, but that I understood why she hadn't. That some gifts can only be received through breaking. The Afghan held her smell still, or maybe I imagined it. Lavender and tea and the specific warmth of her. I wrapped it tighter, held the memory of her close. Inside, the empty teacups waited on the counter. The envelopes were gone, carried away in different directions. But their presence lingered, the weight of what they'd held, what they'd released. I thought about the brothers driving through darkness toward their separate lives. Carrying the truth now, the heavy gift of it. No guarantee they'd find their way back to each other. No promise of reconciliation or healing. But they had something they'd never had before. The possibility of real relationship, built on honesty instead of performance. The chance to choose each other, if they wanted to, instead of being bound by the accident of family. Miriam had given them that. Had broken them open so they could be real. And she'd given me something too. This understanding that love sometimes means letting go of certainty, of control. That the deepest wisdom knows its own limits. I sat on the porch as the night deepened. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The cold air made my breath visible, small clouds dissipating into darkness. Inside, the house waited. The kitchen with its dishes, the living room with its rocking chair, the whole familiar architecture of my life. But I was different now. Changed by what I'd witnessed, what I'd learned. Some gifts can only be received through breaking. Miriam had known that. Had trusted me to understand it, eventually. I spoke her name to the darkness. A benediction, a farewell. Then I went inside, carrying the Afghan and the weight of the day, ready to live with the questions she'd left me. The uncomfortable gift of not knowing. The teacups gleamed in the kitchen light. I dried them carefully, put them away. Tomorrow I would call the brothers, check on them. Or maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I would trust them to reach out if they needed to find their own way forward. Miriam would have liked that. The choosing to not know, to not manage, to not fix. I turned off the lights one by one. The house settled into darkness, into silence. And I settled with it, holding the memory of the envelopes, the brothers, the impossible day. Holding the lesson that some love transforms by breaking. That wisdom sometimes looks like stepping back. That the greatest gift we can give the people we love is trust in their capacity to carry their own truth. I climbed the stairs to bed, tired in my bones, grateful in my heart. Tomorrow would come with its own questions, its own uncertainties. But tonight I could rest, knowing I had done what Miriam asked. Had held the space, witnessed the breaking, let them find their own way through. Had learned, finally, what my friend had been trying to teach me all along. That love doesn't solve. It transforms. And sometimes transformation looks like letting go.